Okay. Hello, YouTube. I have something a little bit different for you guys today. I'm going to be talking to Cole Nasrallah. She is a philosophy professor from the United States. And we're going to be talking about the state of philosophy and the role of philosophy in public life in the modern world. So I guess I should let you introduce yourself, Cole. So it's over to you. Who are you?
I'm fine with that introduction. I teach philosophy in Las Vegas. I'm really interested in bringing philosophy back to a more public role. Uh, I don't know if the issue in the United Kingdom is as severe as it is here, but philosophy departments are closing all over the United States or attempting to be closed by other departments. People aren't sure what we do. And
Right.
like if you go into any bookstore here and find the metaphysics section, you're going to find stuff about like chakras, for example, not any work by Whitehead or any other philosopher. It seems like people just don't know who we are or what we really do. And that might be part of the reason the role of philosophy is dwindling. It's circular. So I I'm interested in trying to engage the public and bringing philosophy back to everyone.
Okay. Yes. And I guess that's what we'll be talking about. So I suppose just an initial question to, I don't know, specify the scope of our discussion here is, I mean, it seems to me there are two worries we might have about the way in which philosophy is practiced today. One is a worry about whether particular questions that philosophers ask are worthwhile. So sometimes you might pick up a journal or something and just read through it and think like, why on earth does why does any of this matter? Why should anybody care about the things that they're talking about in this journal? But then there's another question about how philosophy is taught, how it's promoted, let's say, what philosophers should do to engage with the public. And those seem to me to be, I mean, they're sort of different questions, right? And problems in those areas would require different solutions. Because if there's a problem about the particular topics that philosophers are talking about, it's a simple matter of redirecting their attention to other topics. On the other hand, if it's a problem about like how philosophers are engaging with the public, it seems like that's going to require not just redirecting our attention, but possibly changing the whole structure of academia.
Well,
So
that's the fear, right? I think, or at least this is an idea I've come across repeatedly, which is that the role of philosophy is one of extreme rigor, and that it is inappropriate for philosophers to engage in, less rigorous or certain areas. So the political world, for example, we have so precisified and honored rigor and engaged with only these really bleeding edge ivory tower topics that that's how we justify our existence, right? Philosophy is really hard, but it's effectively we've just reduced it to logic alone, and that's our identity, right? At least in the Western world, our identity is this very purist sort of image where what we value about philosophy isn't its ability to change the world around us or meaningfully engage students or change things. Yeah, I think I said change things already, but it's no longer that. It's just how perfectly rigorous we can be, how much we can expand the bleeding edge. So like one specific, like issues of epistemology are wonderful, right? On the surface, we have these questions about what we can know and how we can know it. And those are fantastic questions, and students leap at the ability to try to address them, but then you look at the work that actual philosophers are doing and that is being valued by the philosophic community, and it is so narrow as to be inaccessible to anyone who just has general questions about ways of knowing and knowledge. I have this fantastic quote that I prepared, if I may.
Yes.
So I've been reading The Conquest of Happiness. It's a book by Bertrand Russell, and this edition has an introduction about how Russell himself struggled with this. So Bertrand Russell believed that philosophy was a strictly technical subject, in fact, a branch of logic, which had nothing to do with matters of ordinary life. He still held this view during the time that he lived and taught in Peking in the early 1920s, which meant that he lost an opportunity to help the young Chinese intellectuals who asked him for guidance in matters social and political, which they much needed at that tumultuous period of their country's history. The American pragmatist philosopher John Dewey was also in China at that time and did not hesitate to respond to such requests, with the result that he is remembered today in China with some reverence, where Russell left scarcely any mark outside of Peking University. And I don't know, that just seems like a perfect representation of this problem we've been struggling with for the past century. If we view philosophy as being something like logic, or not able to comment on everyday issues or tell us what we should do in tumultuous times. So, and of course I reached out to you because you engage the public wonderfully.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, I just wonder though, like, there are a lot of philosophers who are talking about, political issues, issues to do with, animal ethics, global justice, abortion. I mean, those kinds of ethical debates. I like how much can philosophers be blamed if people aren't paying attention to them? Like, I wonder that, like, it's like there are definitely philosophers who are talking about this kind of thing. I worry that maybe philosophers are not doing a good enough job at promoting themselves, but if you're engaging in any sort of public relations exercise like that, then you're going to have to be collaborating with other institutions as well, like the media. The media perhaps has an incentive to promote simplistic narratives that prompt strong emotions rather than the kind of careful, rigorous, critical thinking that you get in philosophy. Are philosophers to blame for that?
I mean, I challenge your description of the state of affairs because I think you've left something relevant out, which is what we value as philosophers. So you're a grad student right now, and I teach. Is there any reward for either one of us if we were to, spend the time to write a piece of pop philosophy for any major news outlet or non-academic journal?
Well, no, I don't think so.
Have you found any reward other than, just a personal reward? Have you ever been rewarded by your academy for your YouTube channel?
That is actually difficult to say, because when I was applying for like my master's course and the funding for that, when I was applying for the PhD course, I did actually put the YouTube channel in and sort of say, hey, this is something I do. So it may have influenced the decision to get me on the PhD. But I would say, like, when it comes to moving further in my career, I can't imagine the YouTube channel is going to make any difference whatsoever.
Right, so thank you for making sure that I didn't make a complete ass of myself there. But by and large, I think it's fair to say that we don't reward public engagement. And there's good reason for that, right? A publication in an academic journal, if I needed to take time off work to work on such a publication, I would likely be granted that. There's a there's a mechanism in place for me to pursue those sorts of projects. But the public outreach projects are in no way that I can see rewarded by the academy or by our peers. So when Peter Singer publishes a really successful book on animal ethics, he may be rewarded by society at large, but it's not seen as his actual work as a philosopher by other philosophers. So to that degree, it seems obvious that we're to blame for that.
Yeah, but I mean, so I guess the question then is, how do you go about changing that? Because I suppose, to come back to that distinction I drew between a question about what particular topics are worthwhile and how philosophy is promoted, I mean, the concern here is how philosophy is promoted, right? It sounds like you don't have an objection necessarily to philosophers engaging in the sort of abstract discussions, abstract, very technical discussions that are far away from the concerns of everyday life. Like, that's not in itself a problem. The problem
No,
only
not at all.
emerges
That's wonderful.
when we're not doing the other stuff too.
It's that there's no system to reward doing public work in place. So that to me actively discourages it, because I know I am incredibly busy. I assume you are incredibly busy. We operate under this publish or perish sort of threat at all times. How then are we supposed to sacrifice the time that it takes to do serious, meaningful public philosophy when that could directly disadvantage our careers?
Right. So what's your solution, I guess? I mean, that's the next question, right?
I think what you're doing is wonderful. Doing it anyway is wonderful. But I think, just like any other humanities field, we need to accept that the only meaningful contribution to philosophy isn't necessarily expanding the bleeding edge and advancing these very narrow topics, but it is also making accessible philosophy for everyone. I think we can also really quickly do away with a lot of jargon and the extremely high barrier to entry once we start engaging the public, right?
Yeah.
That's something we always need to keep in mind. And I think more importantly, philosophers need to conceive of themselves as teachers. If you look historically at philosophers, like right back to the Greeks, a successful philosopher was a teacher, or was a philosopher who established a school. Success was directly linked to public engagement. And I think we need to reintegrate that into our concept of successful philosophy, so that we're not being purists and just valuing the ideas, but rather also valuing their ability to make an impact.
One of the things you mentioned sort of early in what you were saying there was about other academic fields and how we need to bring philosophy more in line with other academic fields and the attitude that other academic fields have to public engagement. But it does occur to me that my impression is that there isn't really a difference between philosophy and other academic fields in this. Like, a physicist doesn't really get any credit as a physicist for, going on a Horizon documentary or giving a talk to the public and summarizing the ideas there. Similarly, like an archaeologist doesn't get any credit as an archaeologist for doing that. It's not going to help them advance their careers. It would be a good thing for them to do, but citations are what matter.
Right. You are absolutely right. I may have spoken too quickly, or maybe our mics blanked out for a second there, but I definitely said within the field of humanities. So specifically humanities fields. Scientists engage the public with proof of concept, right? I have no doubt that science has value because I have my cell phone, right? I have a carbon fiber bike. I have the ability to have this conversation with you in effectively real time across an ocean. That's how science engages the public. The humanities are different. So I was thinking more of literature and art. And absolutely, if an up and coming author publishes a book that is wildly successful, that is valuable to their academic career.
So you've just explained a little bit about how we might go about fixing philosophy, but I wonder what your how are you going to measure philosophical progress, as it were? You know, what counts as sort of good philosophy versus bad philosophy? Or maybe a more general way to put this question would be, what do you take the point of philosophy to be then? Maybe you could say something about that.
It's an impossibly hard question. Obviously, my students ask me all the time about this, and I'm challenged by other philosophers, which is excellent, about this. And the best I can come up with is, I think philosophy helps us ask questions better. Really, I think my inclinations are along the same lines as Russell's were in that quote I read. My natural inclination is to think that philosophy is predominantly about logic and logical reasoning and mathematical puzzles. And that is at odds with everything I've just said, unless you understand it in terms of critical reasoning that is meaningful to our lives. And this is what my students confront me with all the time. They'll see, I don't know, I'll be introducing them to truth functional logic, and they will be disgusted. And what is this? I hate this. This is the worst. And I need to remind them that this is a way of reasoning. This is a way of reasoning, and making sure that our own reasoning, when we engage with the world, is good and strong, and making sure that the choices and conclusions we come to are good and strong. But it also guides us in asking questions, because if the questions we ask of the world are just like, what is the meaning of life, right? These imprecise questions, a good reasoner is going to immediately recognize that that's not receptive to interrogation. That's the sort of question we can't do anything with. And there's no progress if we're just asking those questions. So I do want answers, which a lot of philosophers don't particularly care about. But more than I want answers, I think we need to teach the world and ourselves how to better ask questions. And I think that's what philosophy at its core does.
Okay. And so what would be an example of how that would play out, like in a piece of public philosophy, or in a problem that is of concern to the everyday person?
Okay, this is right now, this is a particularly hot button issue, but all these people have been dying from vaping in America. And with this wave of vaping deaths have come, all these legislative actions to, target flavors that underage users, teenagers, might like, to, limit the sale or tax them at a higher rate. And what's happened there, what I see when I watch what's happening in the world in this specific scenario, is we have a crisis, and that crisis is not being analyzed with any kind of rigor, right? There is a fact. People are dying from this substance. We don't know what that substance is yet. It's starting to look like it is black market THC cartridges. that are causing these deaths. But without investigating what's actually happening and removing our personal biases and thinking really rigorously and critically about the issue, we end up with legislation being pushed through that is only vaguely related to what initially caused this stir. So that's to say, on one hand, we have people dying, and that needs to be addressed. And somehow the way we're addressing it is by targeting companies that have mango flavored nicotine cartridges and taxing them at a higher rate. And that to me, that disconnect between these two issues and the inability to actually address the one and the propensity to be distracted by the other and feel like we're doing something is a product of really poor reasoning and an inability to question and interrogate ideas appropriately.
I worry if in that particular case you're perhaps not being cynical enough about the people who are passing the legislation in question. I mean, I don't really know much about the specific case of vaping, right? But the way that you've presented it is, well, you know, there are people who've basically thought about the issue with a view to doing what's best for the society or something along those lines, and they've come to the conclusion via this process of faulty reasoning that vaping should be banned and that would have good consequences. Whereas, I mean, the more cynical way to look at it might be something like, hang on a minute, maybe the tobacco companies are going to earn more money if vaping isn't allowed and they're paying off the legislators.
Maybe, but what's important is that, one, you've critically attacked my my statement beautifully and demonstrated exactly what I'm talking about. And two, I'm not making any assumptions that these are the same groups of people doing this, but given the way our legislation works, and not just our legislation, but given the way our media works, I'm more concerned with the fact that people who on Monday were concerned about, you know, a relatively small number of people dying, on Friday feeling like something is being done because mango flavored nicotine vapes have been banned. The people who are actually, you know, passing these laws or arguing for these sorts of bans and taxes, I have no idea what their motive is. My concern is that the general public doesn't seem to have noticed that they started out concerned on Monday with one thing, and they've been placated by Friday with something else entirely.
Yeah.
That is a failure to understand how to interrogate these ideas themselves. It's a failure to analyze the information they're being given, and also to understand what sorts of solutions address which sorts of problems, which again is just a problem of critical reasoning and an absence of that. So I would define progress as asking better questions and interrogating our own ideas in better ways.
Okay. So one of the things you quite kindly mentioned at the beginning of our discussion was that my channel is an example of public philosophy. I mean, I suppose a lot of the things on my channel are quite technical. I mean, I do go into a lot more depth than I suppose a layperson might be interested in. But I mean, I guess this just brings me on to sort of why we got in touch in the first place. You objected to one of the videos I made where I just talked about friends with benefits, which is not an academic topic. I mean, it's not a topic
not
that no. Interestingly, it got a lot more views than, for instance, my video on natural kinds, or my video on the value of beauty in science and things like that. So yeah, the videos that I spent hours and hours writing and designing these PowerPoints for and all of this had far fewer views than like a 10-minute discussion of friends with benefits. So
I think you're being a little unfair to yourself. You did have a taxonomy of relationships,
okay,
and
yeah.
I think you addressed the topic academically, which is kind of exactly what I'm advocating doing. I don't think you addressed it that well, although you did use your public philosophy as a means of working through ideas with the general audience, which is how I came into the picture, because I think you're dead wrong.
Right, yeah. I mean, you mentioned that you would like to put the refutation of that video out into the world. So would you like to do that now? Or should I say...
I would, but you need to set the stage.
Yeah, maybe I should say
so
what the
your
argument
position?
was. Actually, I didn't really have a position, because I was just sort of saying, hey, here's a problem that I've...
You were spitballing,
was...
but you were spitballing about a position that you did have. You asserted a position. You said you might be wrong. What was your position? I don't want to articulate it for you. That would be inappropriate.
I think the challenge basically amounted to the fact that it seems to me that a romantic relationship consists of friendship plus sex, or maybe I should say both emotional intimacy and physical intimacy. So the taxonomy that I presented it was like, okay, if you've got emotional intimacy and physical intimacy, you're in a romantic relationship. If you've got emotional intimacy without physical intimacy, that's a standard friendship. If you've got physical intimacy without emotional intimacy, that's just fuck buddies. And if you have neither emotional nor physical intimacy, then you're just like acquaintances or colleagues or whatever. So I guess the challenge that I raised was, well, all right, what if you're claiming that there is such a thing as a friends with benefits relationship? So these are people who are friends who have sex with each other. There must be something other than sex that distinguishes romantic relationships from normal friendships. So what is it then? What is it that distinguishes a romantic relationship from a friendship? Because, I mean, seemingly, it seemed to me, well, everything you do in a romantic relationship you can do with a friend, except the sex stuff. You know, I can talk about my feelings with a friend. I can have a meal with a friend, go out to the zoo with a friend, whatever. Right.
I like your list of activities.
Right. So talk about philosophy with a friend, whatever, you know. But the sex is not something that happens between friends, right? So that was the challenge. That was the maybe I should say puzzle. And of course I asserted it as a position, but you know, I was intentionally being contrarian, I guess. I'm kind of aware that it was a possibly silly
It's okay. It was charming. And it got us talking. But tell me if I'm wrong. You seem to be saying that friends with benefits and relationships it was a distinction without actual difference.
Yeah, that's basically it. So I guess when I talked about how the concept is incoherent, what I was saying was incoherent was the claim that there is a distinction between romantic relationships and friends with benefits. So they seem to amount to the same thing to me.
Well, and in the interest of doing public philosophy, and I loved how you engaged with that idea, a non-academic idea, in a very rigorous and academic way. I thought it was an excellent demonstration of exactly what I want to see done and what I myself am trying to do. I just think you missed something. So you accounted for non-monogamous relationships, romantic relationships without intimacy, all the polyamorous, I already said that, relationships. You went down a list, and you said because these things exist, it can't be something like monogamy, right? Or exclusivity or anything like that. And I think actually it is about exclusivity, but in a different department. It is a sort of a relationship implies primacy of emotional value. So there's a hierarchy in all of our relationships. I have acquaintances, I have work friends, I have, hiking buddies, I have drinking buddies, I have lifelong friends from my childhood, and I maybe even have a handful of best friends or just one best friend. But there's a clear hierarchy. And I would say being a romantic partner grants primacy to that person among one's friends group. So it is friends with benefits. That's correct. But to say you are in a relationship with somebody is to say that they have primacy among all these other relationships that you have.
Actually, yeah, I liked how you put it when you emailed me.
Probably better because I had
Well,
time to think it through.
no, you sort of said, because I just copied the quote here, and you said something along the line. So you said, to put it more conversationally, my ex got boyfriend privilege, and all my friends knew this. Boyfriend privilege meant that they could not tell me anything without the expectation that I will share it with him. It meant that if I was to be invited somewhere, the expectation should be that he was invited too, etc. Which struck me as being kind of absolutely right and as basically refuting my position. So I suppose that
you wanted boyfriend privilege. That's the nail in the coffin.
Well, no, it was just this point in particular about how, so the example you give where if you were invited somewhere, there's an expectation, at least in most normal circumstances, that he's coming along as well, which is not the case with friends. So I don't know. I just think you're right, which makes this.
I think I went further too.
You said other things as well. I mean,
benefit. It's important to recognize that if you're in a friends with benefits situation, that person does not or ought not have the expectation that they come along on vacation with you, or even be invited, or that they be invited to parties with you, or I don't want to call it an entitlement, but saying this relationship is a friends with benefits relationship says that you don't get those same set of assumptions. You don't get those same privileges by default. You are a friend, so you get all the privileges of a friend, which is, I'm going to be honest with you. I want to see you succeed in the world, et cetera, et cetera. But I'll do what I can to help you succeed in the world. But there's no expectation that they get those special privileges that are reserved for this other kind of relationship where, my boyfriend would have been furious with me if I had, gone off on a cruise and not told him.
Right.
Whereas a friend would not have, maybe a very needy friend, but a friend would not have that expectation, or the expectation that I share everything with them, for example.
Right. Of course, the problem with this example of a public philosophy debate is that there's nowhere further for us to go on this, because I think you're right. So there's no debate to be had. There's no argument to be had.
That's not the only value, right? The part of the value is just engaging with these ideas with some rigor, publicly and conversationally. So, and I like being right.
Well, you did, when we spoke before, you did say that you were very keen to get the refutation of my claim out into the world. Are you happy that has been achieved?
Well, yeah, because I don't want incorrect ideas floating around out there for people. And you had done a really good job of stating your position and ruling out some counter arguments that people might present. For example, monogamy or exclusivity. I felt you addressed that really well. And your position wasn't unassailable. But I could see how somebody trying to engage with these ideas for the first time, or seeing somebody engage with these ideas rigorously, might have taken your position to be unassailable or better than it was, and then, you know, taken that position as their own. And I didn't want that happening, because I think friends with benefits are great. But also,
well, look, I mean,
because
even though I'd argued that it was incoherent, I'm still all in favour of doing it. I mean, I'm happy to do things that I think are inconsistent if they seem like they might be fun.
like Sisyphus, in the face of the absurd. That's, but no, it's important to me that, yeah, this critical posture is taken as a good thing. So yes, you addressed an idea with a critical posture. I responded somewhat adversarially, but also critically, and we came to a conclusion about something that is maybe prescient in people's lives, maybe more so than whether or not we can really know that we're not brains and bats, right?
Yep, fair enough. I mean, yeah, most people I think would be more concerned about the friends with benefits stuff, although I don't know. That I did actually get a comment on that video, I think, from somebody who was sort of saying, yeah, this is like analytic philosophy at its worst. This is just sort of pointless semantics. It was along, I can't remember exactly what they said, but not everybody was so keen to engage in critical thinking about the nature of friends with benefits.
I can't imagine they have many successful relationships, because I don't know, when you approach a relationship, that philosophic idea that the first step is clarification. I think that's a wonderful thing to have on the table. So I don't know. I'm somewhat prolific in regard to my relationships, and I know it is incredibly beneficial to very early on clarify expectations and terms, and, you know, what we're both looking for. And you can dismiss that as semantics, but it has a very real and positive effect on these relationships that I have. So I'm not quite forced to conclude that commenter is just not great with relationships.
I probably wasn't expressing their comment very well, to be fair. I can't really remember what it was.
Either way, the dismissal of these sorts of things as just semantics seems to me to be a failure of the imagination of the commenter, not a de facto devaluation of clarification or analytic philosophy.
But then there is a question about like how we go about determining what counts as the good stuff versus the bad stuff in that respect. Because like when I know that when I made that video, I certainly didn't have I didn't think it was anything particularly important. You know, it was just a sort of idea that occurred to me. I thought I'd just put it out there, and I felt at the time that I was making it like maybe this is a bit silly. You know, maybe I'm sort of applying these conceptual tools in a domain that's sort of inappropriate. So I don't know. Whereas to me, you know, a question like, how do we know that we're not brains in vats is it seems much more engaging, you know, I don't know how to put this exactly, but almost on a sort of deeper level, in that it's something that I find like I want to know the answer to that question, and that seems like something important. Would it have any
practical difference on your life?
No, but I don't approach philosophy with the goal of having a practical difference in my life. That's not how I think about it.
I think that is absolutely fine. As I said, I really enjoy just bare logic. Personally, I really enjoy it, and that preference is absolutely okay. But it is important to understand that that's a preference statement, not one of objective value. So to dismiss the other sorts of questions offhand or as analytic philosophy at its worst or mere semantic debate, that seems to me to be an attempt to devalue it in objective terms, right? And that's what I'm resistant to. How we can tell the difference. Is it well reasoned, right? People don't have to like the content of what you're doing. I don't have the expectation that you be fascinated by the same philosophic questions that I'm fascinated by regarding content, right? But I do have the expectation that your arguments be well reasoned. So that is the tool I would use to analyze or distinguish the good from the bad. I'm not trying to. I won't tell somebody something's not worthwhile to engage with. If they want to engage with it, then that is their prerogative. Have they engaged with it rigorously and well and thoughtfully? That's my measure.
So just to be clear then, what is the problem with something like how do we know we're not brains in vats? Where does the issue lie with that kind of question?
Have you taught this with students at any point?
Yes.
How do they typically respond to it?
Honestly, there's kind of a range of responses. Some people seem to find it engaging, some of them don't.
Have you been challenged at any point with the like, what's the point of this?
Oh yeah, but that happens like with almost all of the topics at some point or another. And sometimes I'm able to elaborate a bit more and sort of explain why this might be an interesting thing to think about. Sometimes not so much.
So, I mean, part of that is, again, just them personally objecting to content and having it forced on them. But maybe we should take that critique to heart. So my students about Descartes, they do not like Descartes. I have never had a student just absolutely floored by the radical skepticism that the first meditation presents. And it to me, it seems like I want to shake them and be like, no, you can't know anything. This is serious shit.
I've just remembered something, right? Descartes is, as far as I recall, right, teaching Descartes was kind of okay. When I did the seminars on Descartes, some people liked it, some people didn't. But I remember doing Hume, and it was Hume on causality and induction and that stuff. And I remember reading Hume myself. When I first read Hume, it was like lightning. I just thought this is the most amazing thing I've ever read, and I still love Hume so much to this day. And then when I was sort of having the seminars with the students, a lot of the people in the classes were just like, well, who cares about any of this? Like, what does this matter? And I was like, what? How can you not be? So yeah.
It's baffling when you're put in this position where you're like, but no, I love this thing. Incidentally, I feel the same way about Hume. As recently as, I think it was yesterday, I sat and read Hume at my poor, unsuspecting roommate for about 30 minutes. Just because I was like, no, it's so beautiful. And I'm so keen on it. Like, I think everyone should have to read Of Miracles. Just as a piece of literature, it's incredible, and he's so sassy, and I think it's beautifully written. But that's neither here nor there. I'm just excited to learn that you share this enthusiasm. But I like Descartes as an example because I'm giving them, I don't think anybody would say Descartes was an amazing writer, like as far as like literary value goes. It's first of all, it's very old writing, so we can't expect it to be to really resonate with an audience who's coming to philosophy for the first time and doesn't really understand, doesn't have that lightning moment under their belt yet. I can commiserate with the way my students come to something like Descartes and are like, what, an evil demon controlling things? Like, why? Of course, you know, you're sitting in your armchair. And part of what I want to do as a philosopher is analyze those semantics and try to, again, remove all the jargon from it and present to them something like, okay, well, have you ever gone on a bender and woken up somewhere and been like, how did I get here? What did I do? What sort of choices did I make? Have you ever felt that moment of betrayal, like self-betrayal, where you realize your senses can fail you and your reasoning can completely fail you, and everything you thought was the case a mere few hours ago is definitely not the case now. And from that betrayal, I think that sense of self-betrayal, you can make Descartes matter and make these issues really salient to people. I'm sorry, I started this and I was going somewhere with it, and then I got excited about Hume and forgot. It was to do with the
Well, I'd asked you what was.
what's good and what's bad, but come again?
I said the question I had asked is what was wrong with the radical skepticism, external world skepticism stuff. That was it. And
You
that was.
asked it differently.
Had I? Oh.
Yeah. What's wrong with that? Nothing's wrong with it. It's just we can't expect people to engage with it on that abstract level right off the bat. I think that is an unrealistic expectation. I think you need to make these sorts, the brain and vat questions salient to people before you can expect them to really want to dive deep and analyze it with rigor. Asking somebody to approach something philosophically is no small thing. You're asking a lot of someone when you ask them to really reason about these things and challenge their own beliefs, and dryly presenting a brain in a vat or the possibility that an evil demon is controlling your every thought and constructing your reality, that might be engaging to people when posed in such a way, but the onus appears to be on us to make those meaningful questions worth asking. So nothing's wrong with approaching radical skepticism. We just need to understand that having the expectation that people just want to do that and feel compelled to do that is unreasonable.
Okay, well, that is the end of that discussion. So that's probably not a very good way to end it, is it? But that's what we're going to go with. So yeah, thanks for coming on the channel, and
thank you for talking to me.
Yeah, I guess I should just end with a request for anybody who's watched the video so far, whether you want me to do more of this kind of thing. I mean, I will continue doing the other types of videos I've been doing anyway, right? But I could do this kind of thing in addition. So if you think this is worthwhile, let me know. And I guess that's all. So goodbye.
Bye.